You've grown to distrust the idea of a utopia.
Yes.
A world. I presume, actually, you would imagine a world without religion would be utopian. But let me ask you this: what do you think a world without religion, without all the cultural side effects of it, would actually look like? I mean, would it be verging on pure commercialism and materialism? I mean, would it take people away from any spiritual side of themselves at all?
Well, no, that wouldn't be it, because as we know from bitter experience, materialism and commercialism are unusually, inordinately compatible with religion. I mean, that's why there've had to be so many successive reformations, because the religious life goes so well with greed and accumulation and acquisition. When asked where they really want power and influence, this world or the next, they tend to think rather the same as the more crass materialists among us do. That doesn't make it any easier to imagine a world without religion. And it's not that I don't think I have too little imagination to imagine that. It's just that I think it cannot, in fact, be imagined. Religion is part of the human makeup. It's also part of our cultural and intellectual history. Religion was our first attempt at literature, the texts, our first attempt at cosmology, making sense of where we are in the universe, our first attempt at healthcare, believing in faith healing, our first attempt at philosophy. All of them very crude, and all of them long since transcended and left behind. But respect for tradition alone makes it, I think, necessary for me to say that someone who doesn't know about religion or doesn't take an interest in it is only quasi-literate.
I'd like to ask you what you think about Martin Amos's idea that writers like you must actually believe in some life after death, because not all of you, not all of the parts of you are going to die, because the printed words you leave behind constitute a form of immortality. You've obviously, I mean, is he just being kind, or do you think that there's a truth to that?
Litera scripta manet, the written word will remain. That's true, but it won't be that much comfort to me. I mean, of course I do write. I've always had the sense of writing, as it were, posthumously. I once wrote an introduction to a collection of my own essays. I stole the formulation from Nadine Gordimer. Said you should try and write as if for post-mortem publication, because only then can you screen out all those influences. Public opinion, some reviewer you might want to be impressing, some publisher you might want to publish you, someone you're afraid of offending, all these distractions. You write purely and honestly and clearly and for its own sake. And the best way of doing that is to imagine that you won't live to see it actually written. Then you can be sure that you're being objective and you're being scrupulous. I think that that's a wonderful reflection, but it doesn't, it isn't the same term as immortality at all.
As you say in your memoirs, you've written for decades, day in, day out. I think you said at least 1,000 words a day for many, many years, dispatches, articles, lectures, books, in particular books. Doesn't it give you some comfort that your thoughts and indeed some version of you is going to exist after your death is imperishable?
Well, if you want to know, because I try to avoid the blues when talking about all this, but if you want to know one of the most sour reflections that I have when I think that I'm 61 now and I might not make 65, I quite easily might not, one of the bitter aspects of that is, well, I put in 60 years sort of at the coalface. I worked very hard. In the last few years, I've got a fair amount of recognition for it. In my opinion, actually, rather more than I deserve. Certainly more than I expected. And I could have looked forward to a few years of, shall we say, cruising speed, you know, hoping that it will outlive you. That's how the human species has done as well as it has. The great Cuban writer Jose Marti said that a man he happened to say it was a man. 3 duties: to write a book, to plant a tree, and to have a son. I remember the year my first son was born was the year I published my first real full-length book. And I had a book party for it and for him, Alexander, my son, and I planted a tree, a weeping willow. I felt pretty good for the age of, what, I think 32 or something. But the thought of mortality, in other words, of being outlived, is fine when it's your children, your books, or your trees, but it doesn't reconcile you to an early death. No, it doesn't.
Is it only people outside of your existence then who can actually romanticize this idea of the immortal Hitchens?
Well, people write to me, and it does, I will say this, having, surrendered briefly to the blues there, but I don't want to put on any false front. I mean, in the same way, by the same token, there are people who write to me and say that what I've done or written has meant something to them, that I haven't wasted my time, that my life's been worth living. That's very nice too, but I'd like to have hung around and got more such letters.
It's interesting you should say that, because that's actually where I plan to end this part of our interview, because I do plan to give my sons letters to a young contrarian, and I really hope that they then pass it on to their children. And to me, whatever that means to you, that's kind of immortality, but it's something that that only people who've been following you for years can actually do.
Well, you couldn't have said a nicer thing, and I hope you would have said it. I'm sure you would, anyway. And I have to have, I'm afraid, though, the same response. I'd like to have heard even more people say that, and even met some of their grandchildren and seen if it worked for them too. And this I won't get, but I've lived longer than I used to think I probably would. I've written and published more than I thought I would. It's been better received than I expected, and without being falsely modest, in some cases better than I think I deserve. So don't mistake this for self-pity. But I'm not going to resort to any kind of bogus joviality either.
Christopher Hitchens, we'll leave you there for now. In the way of things, we're going to come back to you again tomorrow. We thank you for...
If I'm spared. Inshallah.
And tomorrow night, in part 2 of our interview with Christopher Hitchens, we talk about some of the extraordinary events in recent history that prompted his controversial shift away from the politics of the left.
As the towers sank, up came this sort of billowing cloud of ordure and wreckage, and including the shredded remains of about 3,000 of my fellow creatures. This is a really evil-looking cloud, and there was a shot from a helicopter above Manhattan showing it sort of spreading on this really beautiful day all across the southern tip of my favorite island, and I thought, it's as if Charles Manson's giving orders today. Yeah.
The other...
That's how it felt. I think about it every day, still.
More of Christopher Hitchens tomorrow.